There's something haunting about the stories we never tell, the gaps in history, the silences in legend, the spaces where fire should burn but doesn't. These absences aren't just empty, they're alive with meaning, whispering secrets louder than any shouted tale. Welcome to a world where myths aren't built from flames, but from the shadows they leave behind. This is the story of the fire that was never lit, a journey into the heart of legends born not from what was said, but from what was deliberately or devastatingly left unsaid. Think of the most enduring myths you know. Odds are, their power doesn't just come from the grand battles or the heroic deeds, but from the mysteries they refuse to solve, the questions they leave hanging in the air. What happens when a culture's most sacred story isn't written in ink or carved in stone, but etched into the silence between words? How does a myth survive when its very foundation is nothingness? From the ancient temples where rituals were performed in perfect quiet to the modern folktales that thrive on what they don't reveal, absence has a way of shaping our imagination far more than presence ever could. It's the unlit fire that somehow warms us, the unsung hero whose name we ache to know. These voids aren't accidents, they're invitations. They pull us in, demanding we fill the gaps with our own fears, hopes, and dreams. And that's why these myths endure, because they're not just stories. They're mirrors, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we don't yet understand. So why do we cling to these half-told tales? Why does the human mind obsess over the missing piece, the unanswered question? Perhaps it's because absence is the ultimate canvas. It gives us room to wonder, to project, to imagine possibilities far richer than any single truth could contain. Over the centuries, cultures have weaponized silence, turned emptiness into prophecy, and crafted entire belief systems around what wasn't there. Today, we'll unravel how these gaps in narrative became the foundations of faith, how the unlit fire became a symbol of both loss and infinite potential. This isn't just a study of myths, it's an exploration of the human heart and the stories we tell ourselves when the world goes quiet, ready to step into the void. Let's begin. Take the Norse-Gard Boulder, beloved and radiant, whose death sent shockwaves through the myths of the North. His story doesn't end with tragedy, it lingers on the edge of a promise, the whisper of his eventual return after Ragnarok. But that return never comes, not in any surviving tale. That absence is deliberate, a gap left open like an unanswered question. And yet, it's that very emptiness that gives the myth its power. Without closure, without resolution, the story lives on in the minds of those who hear it, evolving with every retelling. This is the paradox of mythological absence. The less a story gives you, the more it demands you give to it. Now turn to the Aboriginal concept of the dream time, where creation isn't just about what's spoken but what's held in sacred silence. Certain stories aren't told openly. They're guarded, passed down selectively, their power residing in what's withheld. These aren't gaps from neglect, they're intentional, like the negative space in a painting that defines the subject. When a culture chooses not to speak a story aloud, it isn't erasing it. It's elevating it, letting the unspoken words resonate deeper than any shouted narrative ever could. Even in modern folklore, absence works its magic. Think of urban legends where the terror lies in what you don't see, the shadowy figure just beyond the streetlight, the static-filled voice on the phone that never quite speaks. These stories unsettle us not because of what they reveal, but because of what they refuse to show. Our brains rush to fill those voids, conjuring horrors far worse than any concrete description. It's the same instinct that turns a half-glimpsed shape in the woods into a monster, or an unfinished melody into an earworm. So why does absence hold such sway over us? Perhaps because it mirrors the uncertainties of our own lives. We live with unanswered questions, lost loves, paths untaken, words left unsaid. Myths built on absence don't just reflect our stories, they become vessels for them. They allow us to project our own unresolved yearnings onto something grander, turning personal silence into collective meaning. That's the alchemy of these tales. They transform emptiness into a kind of sacred space where every listener becomes a co-creator, breathing life into the unlit fire. Silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's a language all its own, one that ancient storytellers mastered with chilling precision. Picture a darkened hall in ancient Greece, where initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries emerged trembling, bound by oath never to reveal what they'd witnessed. The power of those rituals didn't come from grand spectacles or elaborate speeches, but from the weight of what went unspoken. By sealing their lips, they transformed ordinary rites into something transcendent, a secret so potent it could only live in the space between words. This wasn't mere secrecy, it was alchemy turning silence into a sacred currency. Fast forward to modern horror, and the technique hasn't changed, only the medium has. Think of the most spine-tingling moments in film, the static on a baby monitor in The Conjuring, the unseen footsteps in Paranormal Activity. What makes these scenes crawl under our skin isn't the monster we see, but the one we don't. The director's genius lies in restraint, in knowing that the human imagination will always paint something far worse than any special effects team could conjure. It's why urban legends thrive on half-told details: the hook-handed killer lurking just outside the car window, the whispered phone call from inside the house. These stories grip us because they're unfinished, demanding we fill the blanks with our own deepest fears. But silence doesn't just terrify, it mesmerizes. Consider how folktales weave spells with omission. In Japanese kaiden, ghost stories often hinge on what's withheld, the face concealed behind long black hair, the name that must never be spoken. These gaps aren't accidents, they're traps for the curious, pulling listeners deeper into the tale. Even children's games like Bloody Mary rely on the dread of the unseen, proving that from cradle to grave, we're wired to fear the void. So why does this ancient tool still work so well? Because silence is the ultimate collaborator. It invites every listener to become a storyteller, projecting their own nightmares into the emptiness. A myth whispered in fragments will always outlive one shouted in full, because it's not just a story, it's a mirror reflecting back whatever darkness or longing we carry inside. And that's the real magic. The unspoken doesn't just tell a tale, it reveals us. Fire has always been more than just flames. It's a living symbol, pulsing with meaning across cultures. But when that fire remains unlit, its absence speaks louder than any blaze ever could. In Zoroastrian tradition, the eternal flame wasn't just sacred, it was the heartbeat of the divine. Its extinction meant more than darkness. It signaled the unraveling of cosmic order, a world slipping from Ahura Mazda's grasp. Meanwhile, Celtic families would watch their hearths with quiet dread, knowing a cold fireplace didn't just mean a chilly night, it whispered of broken kinship, of spirits withdrawing their favor. These aren't just stories about missing warmth. The unlit fire becomes a mirror for humanity's deepest anxieties, the paths we didn't take, the futures that slipped through our fingers. Imagine an altar where the sacred flame gutters out. It's not merely a ritual interrupted, but a conversation with the divine suddenly gone silent. That void becomes a canvas for our fears. What does it mean when the gods stop listening, when tradition falters, when the light that guided generations suddenly winks out? Yet there's a haunting beauty in this emptiness. Like the negative space in Japanese ink paintings, the unlit fire doesn't just represent loss, it frames possibility. Every culture has its version of the story that wasn't told, the hero who never rose, the prayer that died on trembling lips. These silences aren't endings, they're invitations. The Maori speak of Wakapapa, the unbroken chain of ancestry, but what happens when links go missing? Those gaps become spaces for new stories to take root, for communities to reimagine themselves. Consider how modern fantasy wrestles with this same idea. In Tolkien's Legendarium, the Silmarils aren't just lost jewels, their absence shapes entire ages of Middle-earth's history. Their glow lingers in the collective memory, more potent in its missing than it ever was when held. That's the alchemy of the unlit fire. It transforms what was into what could have been, and that second question burns far longer. Even our personal lives orbit these unlit fires. We all carry them: the job offer declined, the love unspoken, the road not taken. Myths about absent flames give shape to those private embers, letting us see our small silences as part of something vast. When an ancient Greek libation went unspilled or a Hindu diya remained dark during Diwali, it wasn't just a ritual oversight. It was a rupture in the expected narrative, a moment where the story could had to change. That's why these myths endure. They don't just describe absence, they consecrate it. The cold hearth isn't merely empty, it's waiting. The silent oracle isn't broken, it's listening. And in that pause, in that breath between kindling and flame, whole worlds can rise from the ashes of what never was. Every vanished text, every burned manuscript carries more weight in its absence than it ever did on the shelf. Think of the Library of Alexandria. Its flames didn't just destroy books, they birthed legends. What might those scrolls have contained? Cures for diseases, philosophies to reshape civilizations, star maps older than Babylon. The irony is thick enough to taste. The more knowledge is lost, the more immense it grows in our imagination. Like a shadow cast by a missing sun, these gaps stretch infinitely, becoming repositories for all the answers we wish we had. Consider the Gnostic Gospels. Those early Christian texts declared heresy and buried in the desert. Their rediscovery in Nag Hammadi didn't just add pages to history, it cracked open a doorway to what might have been. What if these suppressed teachings had shaped Christianity instead of being erased? The power isn't in the words themselves, but in the alternate timeline they suggest, the road not taken that lingers like a ghost. This is the alchemy of lost knowledge. It transforms historical footnotes into holy grails. Even in myth, absence operates as a character. The Mayan codices burned by Spanish priests didn't just vanish. They became spectral, haunting scholars with the sense that entire worldviews had been snipped from the record. Modern efforts to reconstruct them are less about ink on bark paper and more about stitching together a cultural memory. Each missing fragment becomes a cipher, demanding we read between the lines or invent new ones. And then there's Atlantis, the ultimate metaphor for vanished wisdom. Plato's drowned city isn't compelling because of what he wrote, but because of what he didn't. By leaving its secrets submerged, he guaranteed they'd never grow stale. Every generation dives into those waters, certain they'll resurface with some glittering truth. The same impulse drives treasure hunters hunting El Dorado or cryptographers chasing the Voynich manuscript's unreadable script. The real prize isn't the gold or the code, it's the tantalizing void, the question mark that refuses to fade. Today's digital age should have killed this longing. With information at our fingertips, why does the idea of lost knowledge still grip us? Maybe because the internet's endless noise makes silence even more potent. A deleted tweet sparks more conspiracy theories than a library ever could. A corrupted hard drive feels like a modern-day burned manuscript. We've traded parchment for pixels, but the hunger remains unchanged. The sense that the most important truths are always just out of reach. hiding in the gaps between what we know and what we fear we'll never uncover. There's a peculiar kind of haunting that lingers around vanished gods, a presence carved not from stone or scripture, but from the emptiness where their altars once stood. Consider Baal-Hamon, the Carthaginian deity whose name once shook the Mediterranean. Entire generations raised their hands to him in fear and reverence, offering sacrifices to appease his will. Yet when Rome's legions marched through Carthage, they didn't just topple statues, they erased the very language of his worship. No sacred text survived, no hymns were passed down. His absence isn't passive, it's an active void, a silence enforced by the conqueror's hand. And yet, something curious happens in that silence. The less we know about Baal-Hamon, the more we invent. Modern novels paint him as a demon, video games cast him as a boss to be defeated, and occult circles whisper of reviving his rights. The god may be gone, but the gap he left behind. That's where the real myth-making begins. Then there are the Norse Vanir, the older, stranger gods who existed long before Odin and Thor entered the picture. Snorri Sturluson's medieval texts mention them only in fragments, like faded ink on worn parchment. Freyja, Njord their stories feel half-remembered, as if the Aesir pantheon overwrote them like a palimpsest. But here's the twist: absence doesn't mean oblivion. The Vanir's elusive nature makes them irresistible. Neo-pagans reconstruct their rituals from whispers, heavy metal bands weave them into lyrics, and scholars pore over scant clues like detectives solving a cold case. The less concrete evidence there is, the more these gods become mirrors for whatever we need them to be: symbols of nature, of forgotten femininity, of pre-Christian mysticism. This pattern repeats across continents. The Aztec goddess Coatlicue, with her skirt of writhing snakes, was nearly lost to history after the Spanish conquest. Yet today, her image resurfaces in murals and movements, a symbol of resistance and indigenous pride. The Greek Titaness Mnemosyne, mother of the Muses, lingers mostly as a footnote, but her name fuels modern memory studies, and her absence in popular myth makes her a blank slate for poets and psychologists alike. When a god fades, they don't just vanish, they enter a kind of mythological limbo, waiting for someone to pull them back into the light. And that's where fiction steps in, turning absence into fertile ground. Lovecraft's old gods thrive on this same principle. Their power comes from being half-glimpsed, their lore deliberately fragmented to feel older than time. Contemporary pagan movements, from Druidry to heathenry, often build their practices around these gaps, stitching together rituals from archaeological shards and educated guesses. The irony is delicious. The more thoroughly a god is erased, the more room there is for them to be reinvented. So do these deities truly die, or do they simply retreat into the shadows, biding their time until the right storyteller comes along? Maybe the answer lies in the way we keep reaching for them, how a name spoken after centuries can still send shivers down the spine. A forgotten god isn't gone, they're dormant, a seed buried in the collective unconscious, waiting for the right conditions to sprout anew. After all, myths don't need temples to survive. They need only the human hunger to fill the silence with something worthy of the void. There's a peculiar magic to the hero who never got their full due, the warrior whose legend ends mid-sentence, the champion whose greatest deed was lost to time. Take Lugalbanda, the Sumerian king who strides through ancient epics in fragments, his exploits scattered like broken pottery. We know he crossed mountains, conversed with gods, and shaped destinies, but the details, those lie buried in cuneiform gaps, leaving us to piece together a hero from whispers. And isn't that the most tantalizing kind of myth? One where the missing pieces aren't flaws, but invitations. The Cherokee Stonecoat legends follow the same haunting rhythm. Stories speak of a warrior clad in living rock, impervious to arrows, his deeds sung around fires, but which deeds exactly? The tales vary by teller, by tribe, by generation. Unlike Hercules with his 12 labors or Odysseus with his mapped journey, Stonecoat's power lies in the elasticity of his story. With no definitive version, he becomes a mirror for whatever strength a community needs: protector, avenger, trickster. His incompleteness isn't a shortcoming, it's a superpower. Modern storytellers have taken furious notes from this ancient playbook. Consider the Mandalorian, his face forever hidden beneath Beskar steel. That helmet isn't just armor, it's a blank canvas, letting every viewer project their own ideals onto him. Or Batman's infamous Year Zero, the untold gap between Bruce Wayne's parents' murder and his first cape. Writers return to that void again and again, not to fill it, but to let its emptiness amplify the myth. Because a hero's untold years aren't just missing time, they're a shadow box where we hang our own fears and hopes. Even historical figures succumb to this alchemy. Joan of Arc's childhood, mostly silence, yet that very absence fuels 1,000 interpretations. Was she a divinely touched maiden or a shrewd strategist? The less we know, the more we argue, and in that debate, her legend grows. The same holds for figures like Prester John, the mythical Christian king whose kingdom was always just beyond the map's edge. His power came from never being found, from existing eternally in the realm of what if. Perhaps that's why these unfinished champions resonate so deeply. They tap into something primal in us: the child's urge to peek behind the curtain, the adult's ache for mysteries that resist solving. A complete hero's journey has a beginning, middle, and end. But the fractured ones, they're all middle, all potential, forever suspended in the moment before revelation, and in that suspension, they become eternal. So the next time you encounter a myth with missing pages, resist the urge to mourn the gaps, celebrate them. Those empty spaces aren't accidents, they're the story's heartbeat. The proof that a legend never truly ends as long as someone's left to wonder what comes next. When flames consumed the Aztec codices under Spanish friars' hands, it wasn't just bark paper turning to ash, it was an entire cosmology, a people's way of seeing time itself dissolving into smoke. Colonial powers understood something primal. To conquer a culture, you don't just defeat its armies, you unravel its stories. The Inuit, whose throat songs carried generations of knowledge across frozen seas, found their oral traditions fractured by residential schools that banned native tongues. These weren't mere acts of suppression, they were deliberate severings, like cutting the cords of a collective memory. Yet here's the paradox: the deeper the erasure, the fiercer the echo. Take the Maori toi moko, sacred facial tattoos once chiseled into skin, each curve encoding ancestry. When British collectors looted these mummified heads as curiosities, they thought they were gathering relics of a dying culture. Instead, they became unwitting archivists. Centuries later, Maori descendants tracked these stolen faces across European museums, not as mourners, but as reclaimers. Every repatriated toi moko isn't just a homecoming. It's a defiance, a stitch pulled back through time to mend what was torn. Similarly, the Wampanoag tribe of Massachusetts, whose language slept in colonial documents for generations, now teaches children words that once seemed destined for silence. Revival isn't nostalgia, it's resistance wearing the cloak of memory. And then there's the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe of 1948, when villages vanished from maps and olive groves were bulldozed over. For decades, official narratives treated it as a non-event, a blank space where history should be, but absence, when weaponized, becomes its own kind of monument. Palestinians passed down keys to houses that no longer stood, recited the names of erased neighborhoods like incantations. The Nakba didn't fade from being denied. It crystallized into a living myth, sharper for every attempt to bury it. This is the alchemy of cultural survival. The stories that endure aren't always the ones shouted loudest, but those forced into whispers. The Cherokee Trail of Tears might have been meant to sever a people from their land, yet walk through Oklahoma today, and you'll hear the original syllables of Tsalagi still clinging to the wind. The Yiddish language, nearly erased by pogroms and Holocaust, now sparks anew in Brooklyn classrooms and Berlin theaters, its grammar carrying the weight of all that was almost lost. Perhaps this is why erased myths haunt so powerfully. They become palimpsests, layered with all the meanings poured into them by those who refuse to let go. The Australian Aboriginal concept of songlines, invisible pathways crisscrossing the continent, were dismissed as primitive nonsense by colonizers. But when elders today sing country into being, they're not just preserving tradition, they're rewriting absence into presence, note by note. Every culture has its unlit fires, its silent spaces where stories should be. But as long as someone remembers to kneel beside that cold hearth and whisper, "Once there was flame," the myth never truly dies. It just waits ember hot for the next breath to make it glow again. Imagine standing before a library where every shelf holds books you can never open, their titles gleaming in gold, their contents forever sealed. That's the agony and allure of the lost Trojan epics, the Cypria, the Little Iliad, the Ethiopies. We know they existed because Homer nods to them, like a traveler pointing to roads he didn't take. The Cypria alone promised the backstory of the Trojan War, the Golden Apple, the judgment of Paris, the abduction of Helen, all the sparks before the blaze. But now, only fragments remain, quoted by later writers like breadcrumbs leading to a feast that's vanished. These weren't minor tales, they were the narrative soil from which the Iliad and Odyssey grew. And their absence, it's not emptiness, it's a vacuum that pulls at the imagination, a literary event horizon where stories bend into myth. Consider the Theban cycle, the other great epic tradition that rivaled Homer's Troy. 7 poems once wove the saga of Oedipus, Antigone, and the War of the Seven against Thebes. Today, we have Sophocles' plays brilliant, but like watching a sequel without the original. The lost Oedipodia might have shown us the hero's childhood. The Thebaid could have detailed the fratricidal war that haunted Greek tragedy. Instead, we're left with echoes, like hearing only the chorus of a song whose verses are silent. Yet this very incompleteness is what makes them magnetic. Scholars stitch together plotlines from footnotes, while poets and game designers like supergiants Hades reimagine the gaps, turning absence into a playground. Zagreus, the game's protagonist, wasn't some minor deity plucked from obscurity. He was a phantom in the records, a name without a story, until modern creators gave him blood and voice. That's the secret power of lost epics. They're not dead, just shape-shifting. The Arthurian legends thrived because Mallory left room for others to add their visions. But the Cypria, it's even more potent. It's a blank space labeled masterpiece. We'll never know if it deserved that reputation, and that uncertainty lets it live forever in the what-if. Like Schrödinger's cat, it's simultaneously a triumph and a disappointment, because the moment we open the box, the magic dies. Modern storytellers understand this instinctively. The Silmarillion feels grander because Tolkien never finished it. His notes are a cathedral of possibilities. The Star Wars expanded universe thrived in the gaps between films, until even its erasure became a new kind of myth. And when Mary Renault wrote The King Must Die, she wasn't just adapting Theseus' legend. She was answering the silence of lost Attic epics, the ones that might have painted him as more than a monster-slaying cardboard cutout. So the next time you mourn a burned library or a deleted manuscript, remember, The greatest stories aren't always the ones preserved. They're the ones that got away, the tales that live in the margins, teasing us with the shadow of what could have been. The unwritten epic never ages, never disappoints, never becomes obsolete. It's the fire that wasn't lit, and so it never burns out. There's a certain kind of myth that doesn't just live in stories. It thrives in the space between words, in the hush that falls when someone says, "We don't talk about that." These are the tales wrapped in warnings, the ones passed down with a glance over the shoulder, the narratives so potent that speaking them aloud risks unraveling the world. Take Orpheus, the poet who dared to sing of the underworld's secrets. His gift was his voice, but his crime was using it too freely. Divine knowledge spilled into mortal ears, and the gods made sure he'd never sing again. His dismemberment wasn't just punishment, it was a lesson etched in blood. Some truths are too heavy for the living to carry. Now cross the globe to the Navajo Nation, where stories of the skinwalker aren't told after dark. To speak of these shape-shifting beings is to invite their attention, to risk becoming part of the very legend you're whispering. Here, silence isn't just respect, it's survival. The taboo doesn't erase the myth, it sharpens it like a blade kept sheathed until the moment it's needed. This is the paradox of the unspeakable. The more a culture insists don't say this, the more the story grows in power, feeding on the fear of its own utterance. Modern folklore understands this alchemy too well. Think of the cursed films whispered about in Hollywood lore, The Exorcist's alleged demonic hauntings, Poltergeist's eerie on-set deaths, or Antichrist's unnerving production mishaps. These stories aren't just gossip, they're contemporary taboos, warnings that blur the line between fiction and something far older. Even online, creepypastas like Smile Dog or the Russian sleep experiment spread with a caveat: don't look at the image too long. Don't read this alone at night. The rules mimic ancient prohibitions, proving that the human mind still bows to the same primal logic: speak the forbidden, and you might summon it. But why does this pattern endure? Because taboo doesn't just protect, it preserves. A story everyone tells becomes mundane, but one wrapped in silence. That lingers like smoke in the bones. The Maori have tapu, sacred prohibitions that guard knowledge and places. The Celts buried their most potent myths in riddles, knowing obscurity was the best armor against oblivion. Even children's games like Bloody Mary or the Midnight Man rely on the thrill of broken rules. Say the name 3 times, light the candle, knock on the door. The ritual isn't just about summoning, it's about daring to cross a line, and that's the secret at the heart of these myths. They're not just stories. They're tests. Every culture has its verbal minefields, its narratives that demand, "Are you brave enough to speak me?" The answer doesn't matter. What matters is the tension in the air before someone decides, the collective holding of breath, the weight of the unuttered word. Because the unspeakable myth isn't just remembered, it's felt, vibrating in the throat like a hum before the storm. And that's why it outlives all the others, not despite the silence, but because of it. Archaeology doesn't just uncover what's buried, it listens to the silence between the artifacts. Picture an excavation site where every missing object tells its own story. A tomb robbed clean in antiquity isn't just empty, it's a crime scene frozen in time, whispering of thieves who believed the afterlife could be plundered. A child's grave without toys isn't merely a lack, it's a testament to a family so poor, even farewells couldn't be cushioned with gifts. These aren't gaps in the record, they're punctuation marks in a narrative written in reverse, where the blank spaces hold the ink. Take the so-called empty throne of Knossos. Archaeologists found a seat carved into the walls of the Minoan palace, but no skeleton. No crown, just the ghost of a ruler who may have never existed. Yet that very absence birthed the Minotaur's legend, a monster said to lurk beneath the throne. The myth didn't arise from what was found, but from what wasn't. No bones, then surely they were devoured. No king, then perhaps he was the beast. The human mind abhors a vacuum, and in the void we conjure monsters and gods to fill it. Even deliberate absences can become cultural cornerstones. The Bermuda Triangle's infamy isn't built on shipwrecks, it's built on vanishings. No debris, no distress calls, just empty ocean where vessels should be. The lack of evidence became the evidence, spawning tales of alien abductions and time warps. When reality offers no answers, myth rushes in with a dozen. And here's the twist. Even when scientists debunk the disappearances showing currents or human error, the legend persists, because the story was never about the ships. It was about the terror of the unexplained, the horror of a world where things can slip away without a trace. This alchemy of absence isn't confined to ancient ruins or ocean graveyards. Modern forensics uses it daily. A murder scene with no weapon implies premeditation. A diary with torn pages suggests secrets too dangerous to keep. Archaeologists of the future might study our empty parking lots and wonder why 21st century cathedrals to consumerism decayed into wastelands. They'll spin myths about the people who vanished from them, never knowing we simply moved online. The most potent myths aren't carved in stone. They're etched in the spaces between. When Ötzi the Iceman was found with an arrow in his back, the story was clear, murder. But his empty quiver, that's where the poetry lies. Did he fire his last shot in vain? Did someone steal his arrows as he bled out? The facts are frozen, but the questions are alive, pulsing with possibilities. That's the power of archaeological silence. It doesn't just speak. It sings, and its melody is whatever we need it to be. There's a reason the scariest monsters are the ones you never quite see. Japan's Tik-Tik doesn't leap from the shadows with claws bared. She's a whisper of movement, the grating sound of something being dragged just out of sight. No face, no form, just the chilling certainty that whatever's coming is wrong in ways you can't even name. Lovecraft knew this terror well. His cosmic horrors weren't frightening because they were grotesque. They were unbearable because they defied description. Yog-Sothoth isn't a creature lurking in the dark. It's the dark between stars given sentience, a presence that exists in the cracks of reality where the human eye can't focus. The moment you try to picture it, your mind flinches away, recoiling from something it wasn't built to comprehend. Modern horror films have turned this principle into an art form. The Blair Witch Project didn't need elaborate special effects to haunt a generation. It showed us shaky footage, piles of sticks, and the distant sound of laughter in the woods, then let our brains do the rest. By the time those final frames flickered out, audiences weren't just scared of what they'd seen. They were paralyzed by what they hadn't. This isn't just a storytelling trick, it's neuroscience. When confronted with incomplete information, the human brain races to fill the gaps, drawing from its deepest wells of primal dread. No filmmaker could design a monster as terrifying as the one your imagination conjures when left alone in the dark. This phenomenon isn't limited to fiction. Folklore across cultures understands the power of the half-glimpsed. The Malaysian Pontianak is rarely seen full on. She's the flutter of a white dress at the edge of your vision, the scent of frangipani where no flowers grow. Celtic tales warn of the Ich Uist, a waterhorse that never reveals its true nature until it's too late. Even childhood games like Bloody Mary rely on the mirror's refusal to show what lurks just behind you. The terror isn't in the apparition, it's in the heartbeat before the apparition appears. Perhaps this explains why the oldest monster of all isn't a beast or a demon, it's the dark itself. Every culture has its version of the thing that watches from the unlit corners of the world, the shape that moves when you stop looking. These stories endure because they tap into something fundamental. The fear of the unknown isn't just about what might be there. It's about the horrifying realization that we'll never truly know. The moment a monster steps into the light, it becomes finite, measurable, defeatable. But the thing that never shows itself, that's the fear that follows you home, the one that lingers long after the story ends, because the missing monster isn't out there. It's in here, waiting in the quiet spaces of your own mind, where every shadow could be something or nothing, and nothing is so much worse. Prophecies that never come to pass have a strange immortality. Cassandra, cursed to see the future but never be believed, didn't just predict Troy's fall. She became a symbol of every ignored warning in history. Her tragedy wasn't that she was wrong, but that she was right too soon. Meanwhile, the Mayan end date of 2012 didn't mark doomsday, yet its failure birthed 1,000 conspiracy theories. Why? Because unfulfilled prophecies aren't dead ends, they're open doors. They invite us to linger in the moment before destiny resolves, where every possibility still shimmers with potential. Virgil's fourth eclogue is the ultimate case study. Written around 40 BC, it promised a golden age ushered in by a divine child, a poem later claimed by Christians as foretelling Christ. But here's the twist: Virgil was likely writing about Augustus' heir. The prophecy failed in its original context, yet that very ambiguity let it transcend time, becoming a vessel for new meanings. Like a river carving fresh channels when blocked, failed prophecies don't dry up, they simply find new paths to flow. Modern alternate history thrives on this same tension. Novels like The Man in the High Castle or Fatherland don't just ask what if the Axis won, they expose how fragile our real timeline feels. The most haunting question isn't how history unfolded, but how easily it could have unraveled differently. Even scientific theories play with this. The many worlds interpretation suggests every decision spawns new universes, making our reality just one thread in an infinite tapestry of might-have-beens. The power lies in the unfinished. An unfulfilled prophecy isn't a broken clock. It's a clock perpetually stuck at 1 minute to midnight, forever holding its breath. The Sibylline books, Rome's cryptic oracles, were consulted in crises, but their real magic was in their vagueness. Leaders could read into them whatever they needed, turning ambiguity into a strategic tool. Today's doomsday cults follow the same pattern. When the predicted rapture doesn't arrive, it's not proof they were wrong, it's proof they weren't ready enough. The goalposts move, the story evolves, and the myth grows stronger for having survived its own failure. Perhaps this explains why Cassandra's name outlived Troy's kings, why Nostradamus still fascinates despite his muddy stanzas. A prophecy fulfilled has an ending, but one left hanging, that's a story without limits, a mirror that reflects whatever era gazes into it. The most enduring myths aren't the ones that concluded. They're the ones still waiting for their second act. There's something about a book that no longer exists that makes it feel more real than any volume sitting on a shelf. Take the Sibylline books, Rome's most sacred oracles, said to contain the empire's fate. When flames consumed them in the 1st century BC, they didn't disappear, they transformed. Suddenly, every senator, every soothsayer, every street corner prophet could claim to know what those lost pages had really said. The less there was to reference, the more authority the books seemed to wield. It's the ultimate paradox. Destruction doesn't erase knowledge, it amplifies it, turning parchment and ink into something weightless and eternal. Egyptian scribes whispered of the Book of Thoth, a text so potent it could make a reader equal to the gods. No complete copy survives, if it ever existed. But that absence is precisely what makes it tantalizing. A book that grants divine power can't just sit in a library. It has to vanish, to become the thing scholars chase through fragments and rumors. Like Excalibur waiting in the lake, its power lies in being just out of reach. Even today, historians debate whether it was a real manual of spells or a metaphor for knowledge itself. But that's the magic of the lost book. It can be both and neither and everything in between. This phenomenon isn't confined to antiquity. When 80% of silent films crumbled to nitrate dust, their absence birthed legends. Frames from the 1927 London After Midnight survive only as still photos, yet Lon Chaney's vampire grin haunts film buffs more vividly than any intact horror movie. The Lost Doctor Who episodes aren't just missing television, they're cultural phantoms. They're gaps filled by animations, novelizations, and fan theories that often outshine the originals. Deleted scenes from Star Wars or Blade Runner spark more debate than what made the final cut, because the unfinished holds infinite possibilities. Digital age hasn't dulled this obsession, it's magnified it. A single corrupted hard drive can birth 1,000 conspiracy theories. The lost BioShock demo that promised underwater rapture became a holy grail for gamers, despite no proof it ever existed. And when Netflix purges a show, its fan base doesn't mourn. They rally, treating its disappearance as proof of its worth. The pattern is clear: destruction doesn't end a story. It sets it free, letting it grow wilder, grander, untamed by the limits of what was actually there. Perhaps this explains why libraries burn in so many dystopian tales, from Fahrenheit 451 to The Name of the Rose. The fear isn't just about losing knowledge. It's about what happens when knowledge becomes myth, when facts dissolve into collective longing. A destroyed text is the ultimate Rorschach test. Everyone sees in it what they need most. And so, ironically, the books that vanish are the ones we never stop reading. Their pages may be ash, but their stories, those are fireproof. There's something unsettling about a god with no story, a name etched in clay or carved in stone, but no legends to give it weight. The Etruscan Coulson's guardian of doorways exists only as a shadow in inscriptions. No grand myths, no shattered temples, just a whisper of a presence that might have once made worshippers tremble. The Slavic Pornutius, four faces staring from ancient texts, but no tales of what those eyes witnessed. These deities aren't just forgotten, they're unfinished, like sentences trailing off into silence. Yet that very incompleteness makes them magnetic. Without myths to pin them down, they become mirrors, reflecting whatever we dare to imagine onto their blank surfaces. Neil Gaiman understood this power when he filled American gods with deities like Chernobog and the Zoria sisters, figures pulled from the margins of folklore, half erased by time. In the novel, their power doesn't come from ancient glory, but from the stubbornness of their survival. A nameless god isn't weak, it's adaptable, a shape-shifter thriving in the gaps between official histories. Modern pagans reconstruct rituals for these fragmentary figures, not because they have a roadmap, but because the absence invites creation. When all you have is a name, every prayer becomes a collaboration across centuries. Think of the Mesopotamian goddess Ninima, known only as a minor scribbled deity until modern scholars noticed her name hiding in economic tablets, overseeing grain contracts. Suddenly, her story rewrites itself. Was she a divine accountant, a protector of merchants? Or take the Celtic Nodens, a healer god reduced to a single ruined temple in England, until Lovecraft spun him into the dream-haunting Nodens of his Cthulhu mythos. A deity without myths isn't a dead end. It's a crossroads where history and imagination meet. Even in pop culture, this alchemy works. The Elder Scrolls games teem with gods like the Missing, a deity who vanished so utterly that worshippers build entire theologies around the hollow space it left behind. The genius lies in the design. Players don't need a backstory to feel the weight of that absence. It's the same instinct that makes a half-glimpsed figure in a horror game scarier than any jump-scare monster. The less you know, the more you fear or revere. Perhaps that's why these ghost gods linger in our collective psyche. They're the ultimate underdogs, outlasting empires that tried to erase them by becoming something no conqueror can touch: ideas. A named god with no myths isn't a failure of memory. It's a canvas waiting for the next hand brave enough to paint it. And in a world drowning in stories, sometimes the most sacred thing isn't the tale, it's the silence where a new one might begin. The scaffolding clinging to the Sagrada Familia isn't just construction equipment, it's part of the cathedral's soul. Gaudi knew he wouldn't live to see its completion, and that was the point. Like a prayer whispered across generations, the building's unfinished spires stretch heavenward not in failure but in aspiration. This is the paradox of the eternal work in progress. It's not a broken promise but a living one. Across continents and centuries, unfinished temples hold a unique power. They're not relics of abandonment, but altars to human ambition. Take Cambodia's Ta Prohm, where strangler figs slither through doorways left gaping by vanished masons. The jungle didn't conquer this temple. It collaborated, weaving roots through half-carved lintels as if nature itself was trying to finish the artisan's work. Local legends say the builders fled when a sacred prophecy warned of doom, but historians whisper of drought or war. The truth, it doesn't matter. What lingers is the haunting beauty of interrupted devotion, the sense that every crumbling corridor was meant to lead somewhere glorious and still might. Now turn to Babylon's Etemenanke ziggurat, a mountain of baked bricks abandoned mid-construction. Some claim the biblical Tower of Babel myth grew from its ruins, transforming a logistical failure into divine punishment. But walk its eroded tiers today, and you'll feel something stranger than wrath: possibility. Unlike pristine pyramids that declare their perfection, Etemenanke's ragged edges invite you to dream. What rituals might have echoed across its summit? What gods waited in the shrine that never crowned its peak? An unfinished temple isn't a dead end, it's a question mark in stone. Even modern architects play with this power. The Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York has been under construction for over a century, its evolving design reflecting each era's hopes and crises. The Japanese call this principle wabi-sabi, the beauty of impermanence and incompleteness. Kyoto's silver pavilion was meant to be covered in foil, but when war emptied the shogun's coffers, its bare wood became a meditation on restraint. Sometimes the most sacred spaces aren't those that reach their ideal form, but those that live in the tension between vision and reality. Perhaps that's why pilgrims flock to these sites more fervently than to polished monuments. An unfinished temple doesn't just represent the divine, it mirrors our own unfinished selves. We're all works in progress, our best intentions half realized, our highest aspirations perpetually under construction. When we stand before Ta Prohm's tangled sanctuaries or the Sagrada Familia's cranes, we're not seeing failure. We're witnessing faith in its purest form, not the certainty of completion, but the courage to keep building anyway. There's a particular dread that settles over a civilization when its oracles go quiet. At Delphi, where priestesses once channeled Apollo's whispers through laurel smoke, the final prophecy wasn't some grand vision, it was silence. In the 1st century CE, Plutarch recorded the moment with eerie simplicity. The Pythia could no longer hear the god. No earthquakes, no invading armies, just empty air where divine guidance had flowed for centuries. Rome didn't collapse that day, but something subtler shattered the unspoken contract between mortals and the unseen. When the Norse Volvas, those staff-carrying seeresses who walked between worlds, were hunted down by Christian converts, it wasn't just women who perished. It was an entire way of reading fate's tapestry cut mid-thread. This isn't just historical trivia. There's a reason folk magic traditions like the Dumb Supper persist across cultures. a ritual where ancestors are invited to dine, their presence marked by untouched plates and empty chairs. The power lies in the negative space. What isn't eaten, what isn't spoken, becomes the message. Appalachian families setting extra places at the table, Celtic hearths left cold for invisible visitors. These practices recognize that silence isn't absence. It's a different kind of voice, one that demands we lean closer to hear. Fast forward to our digital age, where new oracles hum in server farms. AI prediction models now forecast everything from stock crashes to pandemic curves, but their most unsettling feature: the confidence intervals, those blank spots where the algorithm shrugs and says unknown. We've replaced Delphi's fumes with machine learning, yet the terror remains the same. What if the system stops answering? Sci-fi nightmares like Minority Report got it backwards. The real horror isn't being arrested for crimes you haven't committed. It's living in a world where the future refuses to be calculated at all. Consider how modern conspiracy theories bloom in these voids. When the CDC pauses vaccine monitoring or a weather model fails to predict a hurricane, the gap isn't met with scientific curiosity, it's filled with elaborate mythologies. Ancient Romans sacrificed black sheep when the augure's birds refused to fly. Today, we dissect Elon Musk's deleted tweets for hidden meaning. The instinct is identical. We'd rather invent sinister explanations than face the unbearable truth that sometimes the universe simply won't speak. Yet here's the secret these silences whisper: prophecy was never about knowing. It was about wrestling with the unknown. The Aztecs had their empty years, cycles when the calendar reset and divination was forbidden. During these gaps, ordinary people became the architects of their own fate. That's the paradox we're circling today. In a world of algorithmic horoscopes and predictive policing, the most radical act might be to embrace the quiet, to step away from the screens and oracles, and remember how to navigate by starlight again. Because when the gods go mute, what they're really offering isn't abandonment. It's an invitation to finally grow up. The throne that stays empty holds more power than one that's occupied. Arthur's absence at Camelot isn't a tragedy. It's a promise scribbled in the margins of history, waiting to be cashed in when Britain's hour is darkest. German peasants whispered of Frederick Barbarossa, the red-bearded emperor who didn't perish in that Anatolian river but slumbers beneath Kifjusa mountain, his beard growing through the stone table until the ravens ceased to fly. These aren't just folk tales, they're survival tactics for the collective psyche, a way for oppressed people to tell their conquerors, our true king is not gone. He's biding his time. History's most enduring rebels are the ones who never got a proper burial. Consider the Serbian Tsar Lazar, whose defeat at Kosovo Field in 1389 should have been the end of his story. Instead, his followers claimed he was taken to heaven alive, his sword passed to an angel until the day Serbia would rise again. 6 centuries later, Slobodan Milošević would weaponize that very myth to rally nationalism. The vanished king isn't just a comfort, he's a ticking clock in the cultural consciousness, counting down to some future reckoning. Modern times haven't dulled this hunger for unfinished endings. Amelia Earhart's plane didn't just vanish over the Pacific. It became a Rorschach blot for theories ranging from spy missions to alternate dimensions. D.B. Cooper's parachute jump over the Pacific Northwest turned him into an anti-establishment folk hero. His fate deliberately ambiguous so every generation can imagine him sipping rum on a beach somewhere, thumbing his nose at the FBI. Even in fiction, the trope thrives. Mad Max, Fury Road hinges on the myth of the Green Place, a paradise that may not exist, but fuels an entire rebellion because it might. What makes these figures so magnetic isn't their deeds, but their unresolved exits. A martyr's death can inspire, but a disappearance that ignites the imagination. The Zulu king Shaka didn't just fall to assassins. His last words supposedly warned that his spirit would return in the form of locusts, a prophecy that took on new life during colonial famines. The Russian mystic Rasputin, whose body was allegedly burned and ashes scattered, still haunts pop culture as the man who wouldn't stay dead. These stories persist because they're not about the past. They're about the future's infinite possibilities, the idea that the right person at the right moment might step out of the fog to set things right. And that's the genius of the Never Was King. He's not a relic, he's a placeholder, a blank space where hope can live rent-free. When Welsh miners sang of Arthur's return during the brutal strikes of the 1920s, they weren't waiting for a 6th century warlord. They were conjuring the leader they needed, one who'd recognize their suffering and swing Excalibur like a Union banner. The vanished ruler is the ultimate political Rorschach test. Conservatives see order restored, revolutionaries see the old regime toppled, and everyone gets to project their longing onto that empty throne. So the next time you hear a legend about a king sleeping under a mountain or a hero lost at sea, don't dismiss it as fantasy. Listen closer. That's not just a story, it's a cultural sleeper cell, waiting for the moment when the world is desperate enough to wake it. There's a special kind of dread that clings to rituals left incomplete, not just forgotten but frozen mid-gesture, like a breath held too long. In Samoa, legend tells of a sacred dance abandoned when warriors were called to battle. The steps were never finished, the chants cut short, and now some say you can still hear the ghostly rhythm echoing in the jungle, waiting for anyone, to complete what was started. This isn't just superstition, it's the weight of cosmic IOUs, the universe's ledger marked with unpaid debts. Take the Greek myth of Iphigenia at Aulis. Agamemnon's daughter was moments from sacrifice when Artemis whisked her away, leaving the knife to fall on empty air. The Greeks sailed to Troy, but that unfinished ritual festered like a wound. Clytemnestra never forgot the daughter she thought she'd lost, and her vengeance, Agamemnon's murder in his own bath, wasn't just personal. It was the universe balancing the scales for a ritual left hanging. The gods don't forgive loose ends. Modern psychology echoes this ancient intuition. Therapists call it the Zeigarnik effect. Our brains latch onto uncompleted tasks, looping them like broken records. A vow unmade, a goodbye unsaid, a last rite skipped. These aren't just regrets. They're open circuits in the psyche, sparking with unresolved energy. The Maori understand this instinctively. When a warrior's funeral chant is interrupted, it's not just disrespectful, it's dangerous. The dead might linger, confused, their journey stalled by the missing notes. Even inanimate objects absorb this tension. The Trojan horse should have been burned. That was the ritual. Offerings to Poseidon were supposed to be consumed by flame, not wheeled through the gates. By skipping that final step, the Trojans didn't just break protocol, they invited the curse inside. Their mistake wasn't trusting the horse, it was failing to finish what tradition demanded. Now consider our own lives. Ever left a job without a proper farewell, ghosted a friendship, felt the itch of an unkept promise years later? These aren't just social faux pas. They're miniature broken rituals, tiny fractures in the fabric of meaning. Folk magic knows this well. In Appalachia, they'll tell you, if you start a protection charm but don't seal it, the evil you meant to block will slip through the gap. The terrifying beauty of these undone acts is their immortality. A completed ritual has closure. It lives, then dies, but an interrupted one, that's eternal. Like Schrödinger's altar, it exists in all possible states at once. The wedding that was and wasn't, the sacrifice that happened and didn't. No wonder these stories haunt us. They're not about what was lost, They're about what might still be waiting in the wings, poised to enter stage left the moment we drop our guard. The ocean's greatest trick isn't hiding lost lands, it's convincing us they were ever there to begin with. Atlantis may be the most famous, but it's just one ripple in a vast sea of sunken kingdoms. Off Cornwall's coast, Lyoness lingers in fishermen's tales, its church bells said to chime beneath storm waves. Irish navigators swore they glimpsed High Brassel's misty shores every 7 years, only to watch them dissolve like salt in water. These aren't just stories. They're psychological buoys floating in the gaps where history fails us. When archaeologists found Doggerland, a real Mesolithic landscape drowned beneath the North Sea, it didn't debunk the myths. It proved why we need them. The human mind can't abide empty spaces. Show us a blank spot on the map, and we'll paint it with golden cities and ringing bells. Consider how these legends shift shape to fit the anxieties of their times. Plato's Atlantis was a morality tale about hubris, its sinking punishment for decadence. Medieval scribes transformed it into a Christian allegory, the floodwaters washing away pagan sin. By the Victorian era, occultists like Madame Blavatsky placed it in the Indian Ocean, a cradle of ancient wisdom. Today's conspiracy theorists pivot to Antarctica, imagining Nazi UFO bases beneath the ice. The land isn't lost, it's liquid, pouring itself into whatever vessel our collective imagination needs. Science even plays along. Satellite scans reveal ghost continents like Zealandia, 95% submerged, while sonar maps outline underwater riverbeds where mammoths once roamed. These discoveries don't satisfy our hunger for vanished realms, they sharpen it. The difference between Doggerland and Lyoness isn't fact versus fiction. It's degrees of longing. One explains Neolithic tool migrations, the other answers why we feel homesick for places we've never been. Modern technology hasn't killed these myths, it's given them new frontiers. Google Earth enthusiasts find Atlantis in pixelated ocean grids, while TikTokers dissect evidence of reptilian empires under the Sahara. The Hollow Earth theory, once confined to fringe pamphlets, now thrives in algorithm-fed echo chambers. It's the same old hunger dressed in new tech, the need to believe there's something just beyond the edges, waiting to be rediscovered. Perhaps that's the real magic of these drowned worlds. They're not about the past at all. They're about the future, the unshakable sense that paradise hasn't been lost but misplaced. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beneath the waves or locked in ice, there's a door we haven't tried yet. And as long as that door stays closed, it can be anything we dream. There's a certain chill that runs down your spine when you break a rule no one can explain. Whistling at night might just be a harmless habit until your grandmother grabs your wrist with a whispered warning about calling something in from the dark. Theater actors won't utter Macbeth backstage, not because they're superstitious, but because the weight of that unspoken law feels heavier than any written contract. These taboos don't come with footnotes or origins. They slink through generations, wearing the camouflage of common sense, their roots buried so deep even historians can't dig them up. Take the Jewish concept of muktzeh, objects deemed untouchable on the Sabbath. There's no lightning strike moment in the Torah that decrees a pencil or a smartphone off limits. The rule evolved like a rumor, passed hand to hand until it became doctrine. Hawaiian kapu traditions work the same way. Certain fish couldn't be eaten by women, not because of some divine decree etched in stone, but because the collective memory said so. Violate these rules, and the punishment isn't just social scorn, it's the gnawing sense that you've upset an order older than logic. This isn't ancient history. Modern offices have their own versions. The printer no one uses because it's always jammed. The chair no one sits in because that's Greg's spot, even though Greg retired 5 years ago. These are micro-myths, little rituals that calcify into law simply because enough people treat them as sacred. Cancel culture debates tap into the same nerve. When a public figure is shunned for breaking some unwritten social code, the outrage isn't just about the act itself. It's about the violation of a story everyone agreed to believe without ever being told. The eerie power of these taboos lies in their ambiguity. A written law can be debated, amended, overturned. But how do you challenge a ghost? The Slavic poroka, a curse whispered to avert bad luck, doesn't come with instructions. You just know to spit over your left shoulder when you mention something terrible, as if your saliva can ward off fate itself. These practices aren't taught, they're absorbed like mother's milk or the shape of your shadow. Perhaps that's why they outlive empires. You can burn a holy book, tear down a temple, but try erasing the instinct to knock on wood after tempting fate. These unwritten laws are the ultimate survivors, shape-shifting to fit new eras while keeping their ancient teeth. They don't need enforcement because they've colonized something deeper than reason, the part of us that still wonders, late at night, if whistling really does summon something hungry from the trees. There's a particular grief that lingers around a language no one alive can speak, not just for the words lost, but for the worlds those words once held. When the last fluent speaker of Etruscan took their final breath around the time of Emperor Augustus, they didn't just vanish. They carried with them an entire cosmology, rituals for interpreting lightning strikes, names of gods we can only guess at from silent tomb paintings. The few inscriptions that survive are like overhearing a conversation through a wall. You catch the rhythm, maybe a word or two, but the meaning slips through your fingers like smoke. And yet, those fragments haunt us. Why did the Etruscans leave behind bronze livers inscribed with the names of deities, as if the organ itself were a map of the heavens? Without the stories behind them, these artifacts become mirrors, reflecting whatever we dare to project onto them. Then there's the Voynich manuscript, that enigmatic book penned in a script no one's ever cracked, filled with illustrations of plants that don't grow on this earth and women bathing in emerald green tubes. Cryptographers and medievalists have obsessed over it for centuries, but here's the twist. Its power doesn't come from the secrets it might reveal. It thrives on the tantalizing possibility that some knowledge is forever out of reach. Like a dream you can't quite remember upon waking, the manuscript teases with the sense that understanding is just beyond the horizon, if only you looked at it sideways or whispered the right word. This isn't just about the past. Right now, as you're watching this, a language dies every 2 weeks. With it goes an entire way of seeing the world. The Toshiro people of Peru once had a word for the exact moment a canoe glides into still water, a term with no equivalent in Spanish or English. The last fluent speaker, Amadeo Garcia Garcia, spent years recording his language alone in a hut, knowing no one would ever speak it back to him. What myths, what songs, what ways of describing the stars evaporated when he passed? We'll never know, and that aching not knowing becomes its own kind of myth. Perhaps some stories resist translation not because they're obscure, but because they're too vast to fit into another tongue. The Sami Yoik, a traditional song of the Arctic, isn't just about a person or place, it's meant to be that person or place. A sonic embodiment that collapses the distance between singer and subject. Explain it in English and you're left with a description, not the thing itself, like trying to capture the taste of snowflakes on your tongue by reading a recipe. That's the paradox of these untranslatable myths. The less we understand, the more room they give us to wonder. The Etruscan underworld goddess Vanth, forever frozen in art with her torch and winged sandals, will never be pinned down by a tidy Wikipedia summary. Her mystery is her immortality, and when linguists finally do crack the Voynich manuscript, part of its magic will die that day because the answers can never be as luminous as the questions. So the next time you hear about a language on the brink of extinction, don't just mourn the grammar or the vocabulary. Listen for the myths trembling beneath the surface, the ones that might slip away before we even realize they were there. Some stories aren't meant to be solved, only sensed like the echo of a melody in an empty room, or the shadow of a flame that was never lit. Da Vinci's adoration of the Magi hangs in the Uffizi not as a painting, but as a ghost, a swirling underdrawing of figures caught between existing and vanishing, their colors never filled in. For centuries, scholars have leaned close, trying to decipher the maestro's intentions from the charcoal lines, as if the real masterpiece isn't what's on the canvas, but the infinite possibilities trapped beneath it. This is the cruel magic of unfinished art. It denies us closure, but grants us something far more intoxicating, the freedom to imagine. Coleridge's Kubla Khan, famously interrupted by a visitor and never completed, teases us with its preface's promise of a lost vision, a person from poor luck who shattered the dream. The poem's fragments are like a ruined palace. Its broken arches hint at grandeur we'll never see, yet that incompleteness makes it immortal. The unmade is never truly abandoned. It's a baton passed to the audience. When Arthur Conan Doyle shoved Sherlock Holmes off Reichenbach Falls, readers refused to let the detective stay dead. They wrote letters, wore mourning bands, and eventually willed him back to life. Doyle's creation slipped his control, becoming a communal myth, proof that the stories we don't finish are the ones that never end. Modern fandoms operate the same way. Deleted scenes from Blade Runner spawned decades of speculation, while Star Wars fans stitch together cut content like digital archaeologists, piecing together the films that might have been. Video games have turned this longing into a genre of its own. Glitch hunters spend years scouring code for traces of abandoned levels, like the infamous Half-Life 2 Borealis chapter, a ghost ship drifting through the game's files. These aren't just Easter eggs, they're portals to parallel universes where the story branched differently. The original BioShock's cut a Big Daddy adoption mechanic where players could bond with the hulking protectors' lives on in forums as a what-if more vivid than the final game. Unmade art thrives in this limbo where every fan becomes a co-creator, grafting their dreams onto the scaffolding of what's missing. But why does the unfinished haunt us so deeply? Perhaps because it reflects our own unrealized selves. Da Vinci's sketches show hands reaching, faces half-formed. They're not failures but frozen potential. In Japan, there's a term for this, ma, the beauty of the unpainted space, the pause between notes. The greatest works might be the ones we never complete, because they live in the gap between vision and execution, where every viewer becomes the artist. That symphony you'll never write, that novel gathering dust in a drawer, they're not gone. They're myths waiting for someone else to breathe them awake. The moment a myth outlives its believers, something curious happens. It doesn't vanish so much as shapeshift, slipping into the cracks of a new era's uncertainties. Take the Greek pantheon. Once thundering from Olympus, they now linger as planetary names and psychological archetypes, their power distilled into metaphors for human nature. Zeus isn't hurling lightning anymore, but his shadow lingers in every story about abusive authority figures. Aphrodite lives on not in temple rites, but in the algorithms of dating apps, her essence repackaged for the digital age. This isn't extinction, it's evolution, a divine witness protection program where old gods assume new identities. Now consider Santa Claus, a figure who's undergone more rebrands than a fading pop star. Beginning as the 4th century Saint Nicholas, patron of sailors and thieves, he was later molded by Victorian poets into the jolly gift giver we know today. But his latest incarnation, a corporate mascot, his red coat coincidentally matching Coca-Cola's branding, the saint who once saved children from poverty now fuels Black Friday sales. Yet even as commercialism hollows out his origins, something mythic persists: the collective need for generosity incarnate, for a figure who defies the limits of time and physics to reward the deserving. Modern mythmaking thrives in these cultural vacuums. UFO sightings spike not among medieval peasants, but in the shadow of rocket launches and quantum physics. Slender Man emerged not from ancient forests, but from Photoshop contests on internet forums, a digital age boogeyman stalking the liminal space between Wi-Fi signals. These aren't random phenomena, they're the mind's insistence on populating uncertainty with narrative. When science can't yet explain dark matter or consciousness, we fill the void with stories that feel true long before they're proven. The theory of everything isn't just a physics problem, it's the latest chapter in humanity's oldest quest: the search for a unifying myth. Even our skepticism breeds new legends. The very people who dismiss Bigfoot as folklore will refresh missing 411 cases late at night, their rational minds tugged by the possibility of wilderness that still holds secrets. Ancient cultures had their vanishing islands and sirens. We have Bermuda Triangles and mysterious radio bursts from deep space. The packaging changes, but the hunger remains, to believe there's something just beyond the edge of the map, something science hasn't catalogued yet. Perhaps that's the true afterlife of myths, not in their literal truth, but in their refusal to die quietly. They don't fade, they fractalize, splitting into smaller, stranger forms that fit the anxieties of the moment. The same impulse that carved votive statues now spawns creepypasta threads. The Oracle's Cave has become a Reddit AMA. What we call debunking is just the prelude to a myth's next act, because the human mind will always prefer a story, even a flawed one, to the unbearable weight of silence. The fire that was never lit still warms us not with heat, but with the stories we build around its absence. From vanished gods to unwritten epics, these gaps in myth aren't emptiness, they're invitations. They ask us to become co-creators, filling silence with meaning. As we've seen, the most enduring tales often arise from what's lost, forbidden, or unspoken. So next time you hear a legend, listen for the pauses. The real magic might be hiding in what wasn't said. If you felt the pull of these untold stories, share your thoughts below. And remember, sometimes the greatest myth is the one waiting for you to tell it. Think of the last time you stared into the embers of a dying fire. The flames may fade, but the glow lingers, pulsing with the ghosts of stories yet to be spoken. That's the power of absence. It doesn't just leave a void, it leaves space for possibility. The Norse didn't mourn Boulder's unresolved return because they lacked imagination. They cherished it because the unwritten ending meant the story could never truly die. Every generation gets to dream its own version of dawn after Ragnarok, adding new layers to the myth like charcoal smudges on an ancient cave wall. This isn't just about ancient tales. Look at the modern mysteries that captivate us: the unexplained vanishings, the cryptic codes, the urban legends whispered at sleepovers. Their power doesn't come from answers, but from the fertile ground of what if. The lost ending of The Sopranos or the cut content from your favorite video game aren't disappointments. They're gifts, handing you the brush to paint the final strokes yourself. Even science bows to this allure. Dark matter isn't compelling because we understand it. It's compelling because we don't. The universe, like any good mythmaker, knows the value of a well-placed blank space. So why do we keep returning to these unlit fires? Because they're mirrors. The stories we tell about the missing, the forbidden, the almost was there really stories about us. Our fears of being forgotten, our hunger for mysteries deeper than the daily grind, Our stubborn refusal to let silence have the last word. When you whisper a folktale that's missing its third act, or puzzle over a historical figure's erased legacy, you're not just hearing a story. You're stepping into it, adding your voice to a chorus that stretches back to the first campfire where someone said, "Once there was," and left the rest unwritten. That's the secret. Myths don't live in the telling, they live in the retelling. The fire that was never lit, it's waiting for you to strike the match. So go ahead, what will you bring to the